Elias Vance had built his life on trust. It was the cornerstone of Nexus Financial, the empire he'd co-founded with Julian Thorne, a man he'd known since their dorm room days, a man who was closer than a brother. For 15 years, they'd navigated the treacherous waters of global finance. Their partnership a legend in the industry, Elias, the visionary, the ethical anchor, Julian, the sharp negotiator, the ambitious engine. Their synergy was undeniable, their success astronomical. They'd celebrated births, mourned losses, shared secrets that bound them tighter than blood. Elias would have staked his life on Julian's loyalty. He ultimately did, just not in the way he ever could have imagined. The first sign was subtle, a flicker in Julian's eyes during a board meeting, a coldness Elias dismissed as fatigue. Then came the whispers, the closed-door meetings Elias wasn't privy to, the gradual shift in power dynamics within the company they had built together. It culminated on a Tuesday morning that still burned in Elias's memory like acid rain. He walked into the opulent Nexus boardroom, expecting a routine quarterly review. Instead, he was met with a tableau of grim faces, Julian at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. The words, delivered by a corporate lawyer Elias had never seen before, were clinical, devoid of emotion. Mr. Vance, on behalf of the board and controlling shareholders, I regret to inform you that your services are no longer required. Effective immediately. Stunned, Elias looked to Julian for an explanation, a flicker of the old friendship, but found only a calculated distance. Julian had orchestrated it all. A complex web of shell companies, manipulated stock options, strategically timed leaks to the press questioning Elias's judgment and ethics. A smear campaign so effective it had turned allies into enemies, shareholders into a ravenous mob. Julian had used Elias's trust, his focus on the company's vision rather than its internal politics, against him. He hadn't just taken Elias's position. He had stolen his reputation, his legacy, the very foundation of his identity. The escort out of the building wasn't just humiliating. It was a public execution of his professional life. The media descended like vultures. Friends vanished. Elias's wife, unable to bear the pressure, the public shame, and the sudden, terrifying loss of their financial security, left him. He lost his penthouse, his cars, his entire fortune, tied up in company stock that Julian, through a series of deft maneuvers, ensured became worthless to him. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back, a small severance package designed to be just enough to avoid protracted legal battles but insufficient to rebuild, and a gnawing, soul-deep emptiness where trust had once resided. He drifted, a ghost in his own city. Days blurred into weeks, then months. He lived in a succession of cheap, anonymous rooms, the smell of stale cigarette smoke and despair clinging to him. The vibrant man who had commanded boardrooms was reduced to scanning want ads for minimum wage jobs. His resume a toxic wasteland of public scandal. Sleep offered no respite, haunted by images of Julian's impassive face, the lawyer's cold voice, the empty rooms of the home he had lost. He saw Julian on television, radiating success, expanding Nexus Financial, now rebranded with a subtly different logo, his smile wider, his eyes colder. Each sighting was a fresh wound, a reminder of the life stolen, the trust betrayed. Despair was a constant companion, heavy and suffocating. There were nights he stood on bridges, the dark water below attempting oblivion. But then, the despair began to curdle, transforming into something hard and sharp. It started as a whisper, a defiant spark in the crushing darkness. Julian had taken everything, yes, but he hadn't taken Elias's mind, his strategic brilliance, or the burning memory of the injustice. The desire for revenge began to consume him, pushing aside the pain and the fear. It wasn't a fleeting thought. It was a revelation, a new purpose that filled the void left by his ruined life. He wouldn't just survive. He would rise from the ashes, not to rebuild what he had lost, but to dismantle what Julian had built on his grave. This wouldn't be petty vengeance. This would be architecture, the architect of ruin. His first step was to disappear completely. He shed the name Elias Vance, adopting a new identity, a non-entity, someone invisible. He took menial jobs, cleaning offices at night, working construction during the day, anything to earn cash while staying off the grid. Every penny was saved. Every free moment was spent in libraries, not reading fiction, but poring over financial regulations, market analyses, corporate law, and most importantly, studying Julian Thorne. He followed Julian's career trajectory, analyzing every deal, every acquisition, every public statement. He looked for patterns, for weaknesses, for the subtle arrogance that was now Julian's defining characteristic. He learned new skills: coding, data analysis, cybersecurity basics, tools for the modern battlefield. He built a network, not of former colleagues, who shunned him, but of the forgotten, the overlooked, the disillusioned. He found people with niche skills, quiet experts who operated in the shadows, people who had their own reasons to dislike Julian or the system he represented. There was the disgraced former analyst Julian had blacklisted, the tech expert Julian had cheated out of a patent, the administrative assistant Julian had fired callously after she discovered a minor accounting discrepancy. These were the hidden gears of his plan, the silent operators who owed him nothing but were willing to work for a shared goal or a calculated price. Years passed. The homeless drifter refined himself. He built a new persona, understated, unremarkable, but with a mind sharper and more focused than ever before. He worked tirelessly, patiently, each day a step closer to his goal. He didn't rush. Revenge, true revenge, was a dish best served not just cold, but meticulously prepared, aged to perfection. He saw Julian rise higher, his face on magazine covers, his voice quoted as an oracle of the financial world. He saw Julian acquire a vast art collection, buy multiple mansions, marry a socialite half his age. Julian was living the life Elias had built for them, but corrupted by unchecked ambition and the ghost of betrayal. Elias waited, watching Julian build his second empire, identifying its structural weaknesses. Julian, grown complacent and arrogant, made mistakes, small at first, then larger. He cut corners, relied on yes-men, underestimated his rivals, and most importantly, believed himself invincible. He had no idea the quiet man observing him from the periphery, the anonymous online accounts tracking his every move, the subtle shifts in the market Elias was orchestrating, were connected to the ghost of the partner he had buried. The plan began to unfold, a complex, multi-layered operation years in the making. Elias didn't attack Nexus Financial directly, not at first. He targeted Julian's external ventures, the personal projects he poured money and ego into. Julian was attempting to acquire a struggling tech company poised for a breakthrough, a deal that would solidify his legacy beyond finance. Elias, using his network and carefully placed information, initiated a quiet, behind-the-scenes counter-operation. He didn't overtly bid. Instead, he subtly increased the valuation of key patents Julian needed, spread rumors about hidden liabilities, and introduced regulatory hurdles Julian hadn't anticipated. He used proxies, shell corporations within shell corporations, layering his involvement until it was untraceable. The deal began to unravel, not dramatically, but slowly, painfully, bleeding Julian's resources and damaging his reputation for infallibility. Julian raged, suspecting rivals, the government, bad luck, anything but the ghost of Elias Vance. Simultaneously, Elias targeted Julian's art collection, not to steal it, but to undermine its value and provenance. He exposed forgeries Julian had unknowingly purchased, planted doubts about the authenticity of other pieces, causing a ripple effect in the art market that saw the value of Julian's prized collection plummet. It was a personal attack, hitting Julian where his new money ego was most vulnerable. These were skirmishes, designed to chip away at Julian's resources and confidence, to make him feel the pressure without knowing the source. The true target was Nexus Financial itself, built on the fraudulent foundation Julian had created. Elias had spent years meticulously gathering evidence. The original forged documents used to oust him, logs of the manipulated data, encrypted communications between Julian and his co-conspirators, proof of insider trading and regulatory violations Julian had committed in his ascent. He didn't just have the evidence. He had analyzed the complex legal and financial structures Julian had created to hide his tracks, identifying the single, crucial keystone holding it all together. The time came for the final phase. Julian was on the cusp of closing his largest deal yet, a merger that would make Nexus Financial a global colossus, cementing Julian's power for decades. The signing ceremony was set to be a lavish, televised event, the pinnacle of Julian's career. Elias knew this was the moment. He chose his timing with surgical precision. Days before the signing, anonymous packages began arriving at the offices of key regulatory bodies, investigative journalists known for their tenacity, and the major shareholders Julian had alienated since taking control. The packages contained irrefutable proof of Julian's crimes, presented in a clear, digestible format, pointing directly to the crucial vulnerabilities in Julian's corporate structure. It wasn't a data dump. It was a curated release, designed for maximum impact. The storm broke not with a bang, but with a relentless, echoing force. Investigations were launched. News headlines screamed of fraud and corruption at the highest levels of Nexus Financial. The stock price plummeted, wiping out billions in minutes. Julian, blindsided, tried to control the narrative, but the evidence was too damning, the sources too credible, thanks to Elias's careful distribution. The day of the signing ceremony arrived. Instead of walking onto a stage to thunderous applause, Julian was met by federal agents. The live broadcast captured the shock, the dawning horror on his face as the handcuffs were applied. He wasn't just losing his deal, he was losing his freedom, his reputation, everything. As Julian was led away, his empire crumbling around him, Elias watched from a discreet distance across the street, a figure in the anonymity of the crowd. He saw the broken man Julian had become, the arrogant facade shattered, the fear naked in his eyes. It wasn't the triumphant roar he had sometimes fantasized about, but a quiet, profound sense of finality. Julian's carefully constructed world had imploded, built on lies and theft, and Elias had simply applied the necessary force to its weakest point, the keystone he had identified years ago. Julian's ruin was absolute: financial, professional, legal, reputational. He faced years in prison, his name synonymous with corporate malfeasance. Nexus Financial would likely dissolve or be acquired for pennies on the dollar. All that he had stolen, all that he had built on betrayal, was gone. Elias turned and walked away. He didn't feel elation, but a complex mix of satisfaction and weariness. The years of living in the shadows, the sacrifices made, the person he had become, the cost was immense. But as he disappeared back into the city's anonymity, he carried with him the cold comfort of knowing that the debt had been paid in full, the scales balanced not with revenge, but with justice meticulously architected from the ruins of his own life. The ghost of Elias Vance had finally laid his betrayer to rest, not in the ground, but in the cold, hard truth of his own undoing.